And hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for coming to my session today. I'm so excited to be joining you all for AxCon 2023. And I'm thrilled to talk about Microsoft's new inclusive design resources on the cognitive model. I've used Microsoft's inclusive design resources for years to educate myself and others about inclusive design. And as a designer who's neurodivergent, these guidelines have helped me communicate about cognitive inclusion in a way that I've never been able to before. So to be able to help build these resources and share them all with you today, it really means a lot to me. So again, my name is Anna E. Cook. I'm a white woman with blonde hair. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I am a senior designer at Microsoft, and I focus on accessible and inclusive design for the Azure portal and beyond. I'm also a master's student at the Atlas Institute at the University of Colorado Boulder, focusing on inclusive design. And I'll be graduating from that program in May, which I'm super excited about. Today, we're going to discuss how the cognitive model builds on the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. We'll also discuss the cognitive exclusion guidelines. To prime us for this conversation, I'm going to play a 2-minute video. And so if you have any sensitivities to movement or video content, return in about 2 minutes and 11 seconds, and we'll keep going. And don't worry, you won't miss anything.
Every human on the planet approaches situations differently. We all have different ways to think about problems, different things we need to make decisions, and different ways we like to learn. Yet the products and services we use every day don't typically account for those differences. They force us to adapt to one way of thinking. That causes all kinds of problems, from mild irritation to learning curves that are steeper than they need to be, all the way to outright exclusion of folks who think differently. There's a better way. At Microsoft, we've built a practice of inclusive design. The methods we use talk about exclusion from the start, and the awareness that exclusion happens unless we deliberately work against it. Now, we're introducing inclusive design for cognition, so we can thoughtfully adapt our products to the way people think, instead of asking people to adapt to products. The work starts with understanding the motivation behind any endeavor. We identify the goals and tasks for that motivation and what cognitive demands might be in the way. As we do this with all inclusive design efforts, we learn from a diverse range of human beings, the true experts in adapting. We absorb the different ways people approach problem solving. Some people learn by trial and error, poking around to make something work. Some people learn by reading or watching videos to take a step-by-step approach. Some people require absolute silence to focus, while others thrive on noise and energy. When we deliberately seek out understanding and work with people with different mindsets, we can create more flexible, adaptable products. So let's focus on what's universally important to all people, understanding their motivations, what they're trying to accomplish, and the way they want to achieve. Let's create adaptive ways for everyone to participate. Only then will we be able to create something everyone can use to reach their goals. To learn more about inclusive design, go to inclusive.microsoft.design.
Awesome. I couldn't have said it better myself. Let's see.
Every human on the planet.
There we go. So with that, let's talk about how these guidelines build on the existing inclusive design toolkit. In 2015, Microsoft launched the Inclusive Design Toolkit. These are a set of guidelines for building products that help people of all abilities realize their full potential. And if you have not had the opportunity to read these guidelines before, I do highly recommend them, but know that if you haven't, you will not need to keep up with our session today. In our inclusive design guide, when we consider what disabilities are, we focus on disability not as a representation of personal health conditions. Instead, inclusive design is about understanding disability as a mismatched human interaction which builds on the social model of disability. We create disability when we build inaccessible and exclusionary experiences. And we have the responsibility for lowering those mismatches in interaction and creating holistically inclusive experiences. In this toolkit, we discussed how inclusive design thinking can inform product creators of all types, from designers to developers and more. We have 3 inclusive design principles: recognize exclusion, learn from diversity, and solve for one and extend to many. The principles state that exclusion will happen unless product creators learn from people with disabilities, apply insights to product creation, and extend benefits across a broad range of people. Millions around the world downloaded and used the toolkit, but there were whole fields of opportunity the toolkit didn't address in terms of cognitive exclusion. The cognitive model is a first step in addressing cognitive exclusion, which occurs when products don't account for the different ways people perceive and understand the world around us. The Microsoft Cognitive Guidelines include the guiding idea that for any task to be successful, motivation must equal or surpass cognitive load. It's critical to identify the cognitive load or the type and level of thinking required to successfully complete a task. So as an example, if someone's ability to complete a task requires sustained concentration and minimal distraction, they'll struggle to do so in a noisy, active environment. In that situation, the obstacles are too much for the motivation to overcome. In this context, mismatch arises from the degree of cognitive demands that our experiences ask of the user. Product creators often ignore core human motivations and invent tasks that serve the product, not the people using it. Instead, we should make it simple to set goals and accomplish tasks that fulfill motivations. We want to avoid a collection of disconnected features with no mapping between tasks, goals, and motivations. When the tasks aren't aligned, it can seem pointless, like just distractions from their true motivations for users. Designing for cognitive diversity is the foundation for the future of work, regardless of industry. As technology expands, we must consider what it means to create experiences that adapt to people and create along the emotional and functional spectrum. To do this effectively, while also fostering creativity, innovation, and competitive advantage, we must consider cognition and start with human needs, not technological capabilities. Which brings us to the cognitive exclusion guidelines. Using these guidelines, we can work against cognitive exclusion in our experiences. We can begin to ask ourselves, what kind and what level of cognitive demands do our experiences place on users? Are there some types of cognitive demands that are especially heavy? And if so, do we support different needs around capabilities like focus and attention? And do we support many ways for people to be at their best or just ones that mirror our own needs? Our cognitive guidelines include 3 sections. We start by understanding what motivations inform what people are looking to do. We then identify what cognitive demands are in place for what a person is seeking to do. And finally, to offer paths forward for a cognitively diverse audience, we co-create with diversity in mind. So let's dig into each of these sections, starting with motivation. We start with human motivations like creating, playing, or growing, instead of asking what features or technology we can add to the product. Once we pick that motivation, we can start looking for mismatches that prevent someone from achieving it. Starting with motivation is an important aspect of avoiding pitfalls that occur when designing cognitive exclusion, or excuse me, when fighting cognitive exclusion. I'm still nervous. This is my third AxCon and I'm still nervous. Which, despite good intentions, result from poor understanding of science or broad assumptions about people with certain medical conditions. In our cognitive guide, we avoid many of those pitfalls by directing away from the impulse to become experts on medical conditions, because product creators shouldn't attempt to diagnose medical conditions. Instead of problem statements about maybe, say, helping folks with ADHD, we start by identifying the motivation, then the cognitive demands of fulfilling that motivation. People with the same diagnosis, like ADHD, may have very different needs for behaviors like focus and concentration, and many different diagnoses share similar needs. So starting with motivation helps us avoid pitfalls while also helping us identify overlapping needs. I'd like to provide an example of how motivations and needs can overlap from my own life. I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and one of my friends has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A few months ago, we were discussing how we both need clear deadlines at work and at school. They said they like clear deadlines because for them, there are two times that exist. There's now and not now. And so when someone says to them, get it to me whenever, that project gets deprioritized next to everything else. Now for me, I like clear deadlines because I have an overwhelming fear of mistakes, which creates a compulsion to make things perfect. So without a clear deadline, I can find myself going through the same details repeatedly to ensure they're exactly right, even though I've definitely already checked it before. Even though our motivations our reasons are different, my friend and I have similar motivations and needs in this situation. Both of us want to thrive in work and school environments, and both of us need clear deadlines. Let's look at another example so we can map the relationship between motivation, goals, and tasks. If you want to create a deeply immersive, inspirational experience in a video game, you first need to learn to code. If the task of learning is solely focused on technical aspects of coding, you may get extremely discouraged. But imagine how different it would be if every learning step reinforced your desire to build new worlds. Now, in this situation, our motivation is a desire for creation. We want to inspire feelings of curiosity, joy, discovery, and wonder. Our goal in this situation is making a video game, and our task would be learning to code. Now, this example connects between step 1 and step 2, between identifying motivation and identifying cognitive demands. We need to learn how to code and focus on the process of doing so to practice meeting our goal of making a video game. So we can identify that the cognitive demands linked to this specific motivation relate to our ability to learn and focus. By understanding our goals, tasks, and motivation, we can connect them to cognitive demands and the balance we need to create to help people meet their goals. So we just talked about learning and focus in this example, but there are more cognitive needs than this. Our team analyzed secondary research and spoke with nearly 100 experts, as well as people with cognitive disabilities around the world to understand how to best approach this complex space. We're beginning with some targeted areas based on scientific definitions of different types of cognition. The 5 types of cognitive areas we're going to discuss today are learning, focus, decision-making, recall, and communication. You can use these types of cognitive demands in your own efforts to create more cognitive inclusion in your products. So we're going to talk about each of these areas and dig into some of the considerations that come up in each one. So let's start with the cognitive area of learning. We want to think about what it takes for someone to learn something new, because everyone approaches learning differently. Now, because technology is often designed for people who learn with confidence through trial and error, some product designs exclude those who might need additional guidance or support. A person learning to create a game or write a line of code may need different types of guidance in each step of the learning journey. There are a few considerations for us to make our experiences more inclusive when learning is involved. We need to consider how many times a person needs to switch tasks to and from help content we provide. We also need to consider what assumptions are made by experts in a product about what is known when someone new is learning. And it's also important to consider how technology can support and enrich learning moments and what role it plays in facilitating a good experience. For example, how would we approach supporting someone learning to cook a new dish? Now, some people would approach this with trial and error, tinkering with different ingredients and processes. Some people might prefer self-guided learning by following a recipe, using a blog post, a video, or maybe a cookbook. And some people might want to take a class where they receive structured and guided learning. Meeting all of these different learning types can create a positive learning experience for all different types of users. Our second cognitive area is focus. People's well-being is impacted by the amount of information they're inundated with when using technology. Much of our daily lives require that we select and perform tasks, sometimes simultaneously or in quick succession. We rely on some level of attention management to make decisions about what comes next. But these interruptions and distractions all influence this process. We need to evaluate how we are helping or hurting our users and the influence we have on their states of mind. When it comes to focus, we need to consider the cost of interruption. People move between focused activity and states where they're taking in information. So we need to consider what people do to adjust between different levels of focus. We also need to consider the role of distractions and what methods people use to filter them out. Now, for example, how would someone approach focusing on a project? Some people need complete isolation and zero stimuli to focus in, so they might work in a silent environment by themselves. Some people need some stimuli to focus, such as soothing music or background noise. And some people may need multiple stimuli. Perhaps they prefer working in a busy office or at a cafe where they have other people around, other sounds and other movements. Technology can help people tune in and tune out as needed at that moment, responding to shifting demands. We can use technology to protect scarce attention and help people direct it to what matters most by thoughtfully designing for task switching and sustained attention. Our next cognitive area is decision-making. Now, people have very different sets of considerations for decisions: stakes, consequences, risks, contextual information, and more. When it comes to empowering people's decisions, we need to consider what our experience provides at every decision point. We need to understand what information a person needs to decide and where they can get that information. People need to have clarity on the potential consequences of their decisions, and we need to consider how information gathering to make informed decisions vary. and what content we need to create to support that. So for example, how might someone approach the decisions involved in planning a trip? Some people might just look at airfare, looking at that single data point, and make other decisions more spontaneously. Some people might plan multiple data points, such as getting tickets for a plane, reserving a hotel, and renting a car. And then some people might prefer a detailed itinerary, maybe a spreadsheet accounting for hour by hour, day by day, fine details of the entire trip. These are opportunities to ask how technology can understand and provide the information people need to make decisions. Our next cognitive area is recall. Sometimes remembering how to do something or where an object is can be simple, especially if it's important to us. But in other situations, it's helpful to have memory cues. We need to ask, what can technology learn from how people create systems for placing, remembering, and finding what they need? Does a task require people to retain large amounts of information? And if so, what tools can we create to enable recall? When it comes to supporting recall, we need to understand where and when people are expected to remember something. In a flow of interactions, we need to understand how much someone needs to recall and when they need to recall it. We can learn from how people create their own systems for placing, remembering, and finding what they need to achieve their goals, and use what we learn to help them meet those goals with technology. So for example, how might someone remember where to put keys in a new home? Some people might always remember where their keys are and place them in a consistent location. Some people may use reminders to help them remember where their keys are, either through things like physical reminders, like say a sticky note, and or digital reminders like a reminder on a smartphone. And some people make multiple copies of keys because they might realize they could run into recall issues along with any reminders they might use. These are all opportunities to learn from what people's recall habits are and support them in what we create. Our last cognitive demand covered in the guide is communication. Now, language is only one way humans communicate. The way we move, including our body, eye, and facial cues, all create constant flows of signals that indicate thoughts and feelings. And we subconsciously adapt to those cues to different contexts. So for communication, we need to consider different comprehension needs. A person who's new to an experience may want real-time pop-ups or in-context tips, updates, or notifications. They may want information from past sessions to inform future sessions, but fewer tips over time. Some people may prefer more visual cues, while others may prefer written guidance. We want to understand how communication needs shift over time and when technology gets to know our context and preferences better. So for example, a student may want their tutor to simply stand by while they solve a familiar type of problem. But for an unfamiliar problem, they may want more proactive and frequent guidance. The tutor can understand these needs by learning their students' communication preferences over time by getting to know their student. During their first session, they get better acquainted to build trust with the student. By their fifth session, they better understand and adapt to communication needs with the student. And by the 10th session, they probably understand strengths and areas for support and can provide ongoing support with the student. A good tutor will sense these needs intuitively, but technology isn't nearly as adept and will ignore those needs unless it's deliberately built to address them. So we need to investigate how technology can best understand and adapt to a person's communication preferences. So these are our first 5 cognitive areas. and there's opportunities for more. These areas are, again, learning, focus, decision-making, recall, and communication. By understanding the cognitive demands our experiences place, we can better ensure that users' motivations are equal or more than cognitive load. And in doing this, we can create more cognitively inclusive experiences. However, understanding what these cognitive needs are and truly feeling their impact can be a little different. So I'd like to take a few minutes with you all to think about cognitive inclusion in our lives when it comes to the cognitive demand of focus. I have one more video. Now this one is about 6 minutes long. And again, if you have sensitivities to motion or anything to do with video, please come back in 6 minutes. And don't worry, you will be able to continue following along without it as well.
The way I focus has changed tremendously since losing my eyesight. I pop in my earbuds and I sort of shut the rest of the world out and get lost in a trance. Anything more than one standard sound in the background can really compromise my ability to focus and stay precise on my task.
I am currently researching with the Berkman Klein Center of Internet and Society at Harvard University. What I do is look at the interaction between humans and technology and how that influences culture. Hello, everyone. I'm going to do a workshop on calm technology. So we live in this era of interruptive technology. And it's not just interruptive in that we're getting alerts all the time. An alert can be anything. So let's think about how many notifications you might get during a day. Hey, here's a new calendar appointment, here's a new email, this thing has been done, there's a text message, somebody added photos to this Dropbox, there's another Snapchat, scroll up, new 20 more emails. Technology should consider social norms. And how do we make that technology polite?
The most frustrating thing is when a pop-up comes up and sometimes they're not coded right and they lock up my screen. So I either have to do one of two things. If I'm fortunate enough to have my partner around, then he will come in and I got this. But again, at 53 years old, I resent having to ask somebody to help me click and point away from it. And then if I was alone, I would have my entire day screwed.
Well, when I came to New York, the city itself is loud. People talk loud, and there are many noises, like especially the subway. In Japan, people tend to hate the noise coming from the computer or even a cell phone. So people, they usually turn it off, everything turned off. In Japan, that's really rude thing that to make any kind of noise in subway or in public. When I did a translating job at home with my computer, I really have to focus. I always have any kind of notification sound off. I need to deal with Japanese and English. There are some language issue, like the English words that I don't know, and it pops up. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes I freaked out because the computer is trying to tell me something, like my computer is in danger or something. And then, what? Do I need to do something at this moment? And then most of the time it turns out it's just nothing. It breaks my concentration entirely. If I don't have a concentration, I cannot achieve what I need to achieve in my life.
I remember the exact moment that I was told that I had ADHD. I think I cried because for the first time, there was this thing that had a name that fully described who I was. I experienced a lot of difficulty interacting with technology myself, and so I have a very personal connection to Microsoft. So a big question is, how do you know when the appropriate time is? How do you know what the appropriate mode is? When you need to interrupt somebody, what does that actually look like? If I'm trying to focus on something and I am interrupted, I feel legitimately really upset. My temperament is different. And ultimately, my hope is that people can understand the temperament of somebody who has a problem focusing to help create products that allow us to maintain a sustained level of concentration. As experience creators, we can want to add a lot of new features into a particular solution. And we're at this point in time, particularly with a methodology like inclusive design, to critically ask ourselves questions about what's needed, why it's needed, and how whatever it is that you're making will actually interact with a person's mind and a person's body.
So we can look at your attention in different ways. You have your primary focus in front of you. That's high resolution. But if we look at the secondary and tertiary attention, it's not just our visual, it's also our hearing, it's also touch. Technology should use the least amount of our attention and only when necessary. So if a good designer gets you to your goal in the least amount of moves, then a calm designer gets you to the goal with the least amount of mental distraction. So we need the opposite of interruptive technology. We could consider the idea of a calm technology. A good tool is invisible, and by invisible, we mean that it doesn't intrude on your focus. You focus on the task instead of the tool. Calm technology, this concept from the 80s and 90s, said the scarce resource in the 21st century won't be technology. This will all be really cheap. The thing that will be the scarcest resource will be our attention.
All right. So I wanted to share this video with you all because I think, especially in this context, hearing multiple perspectives on something like a cognitive demand, such as focus, is really important, right? And all of the perspectives in that video presented unique situations. And so I want us to take a minute to talk about our own focus needs and to share them if you're comfortable. So, excuse me, take a moment and think about what your ideal environment for focus is and why. For me, my ideal environment is here at home with my earplugs in while listening to music and my 2 cats for company, who are currently sleeping on the couch in a bit of sunshine. Now, this provides me enough stimuli to focus on my work without being bored or lonely, but it also helps keep me from being distracted. So I ask you to consider what that might look like for you. And if you're comfortable, share it in the AxCon chat and discuss. From here, I want you to consider who else might benefit from that environment. Now, again, please feel free to share that in the chat. I think my environment, right, I can only speak to my personal experience here. For my environment, a lot of people who need maybe a little stimuli could benefit, but definitely not somebody who needs no stimuli or more stimuli. I would not personally thrive in a very busy coffee shop, say, during the day. And although I can't see the chat right now, I assume and hope there's some good conversation happening there. And please keep sharing as I continue. So we understand the cognitive demands for learning, focus, decision-making, recall, and communication a little more. You might be wondering, how can we understand these cognitive demands in our experience? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to use our own abilities and needs to build experiences, but this can create bias, and that can lead to a high cognitive demand for users we aren't accounting for. So this brings us to our third and final step in accounting for cognitive exclusion. Co-create with cognitive diversity in mind. Careful observation and empathetic conversations with individuals and groups are key to understanding someone's behavior. Co-creation is a powerful tool to informing our work with cognitive diversity in mind. Nothing about us without us is a key part of making our products consider cognitive inclusion in a way that meets a diverse set of needs. When it comes to co-creation, we recruit people who identify a cognitive demand as an area of concern. Now, for example, maybe that cognitive demand is focus. And since our starting place is a motivation like focus, not a medical condition, we recruit people who identify focus as an area of concern, which includes folks who have medical conditions like ADHD. They co-create solutions with us, alongside a range of people who may not have ADHD, but also get frustrated with similar patterns. Co-creation is a powerful form of research in design and in development. So remember, these guidelines are meant to work within, not replace existing product creation processes. And remember, this is just a starting point. We encourage you to use them with the additional resources we have to identify motivations, tasks, goals, cognitive demands, and whom we might be excluding from our experiences. In terms of resources, everything I've shared today and more live within our inclusive design for cognition guidebook. We encourage you to use this guidebook and reference it to create products that are more cognitively inclusive. We have also created a few more resources for you to use. When it comes to taking action, you may find the cognition screeners can help you better co-create solutions with people who have diverse cognitive needs. The cognition screeners can be used to recruit co-creators that align with each cognitive area and many situational contexts. We also have the cognition worksheet, which can be used to help you integrate inclusive design for cognition methodology into your creation process. It's kind of like that focus exercise we did a few minutes ago during our session. So I do encourage you to try using this to do similar activities with yourself and with your peers. Lastly, we have the cognition case studies. These case studies have been put together to help further show how valuable cognitive inclusion is when designing, developing, testing, or planning any product you're creating. Some examples include Microsoft products such as Visual Studio IntelliCode, so it's an interesting read. All of these resources, as well as the existing ones, can be found on the Inclusive Design website at inclusive.microsoft.com or by searching Microsoft Inclusive Design on any search engine. You'll also find the videos I shared today, as well as more videos that are really helpful for hearing diverse perspectives on the site. Now, the only thing I ask is that if you use these tools, please share your stories with us. We would love to see how these tools have an impact on your business and customers. Sharing this information with us can help us learn how to develop more tools and activities and further our collective efforts to make more inclusive experiences. So if you use them and you have stories to share, share them with inclusivedesign@microsoft.com. With that in mind, my third AxCon session sort of comes to an end. We have time for questions. It's just, before we get to that, it's fun to think that just 2 years ago, I spoke at my first AxCon about auditing design systems for accessibility. And now I've had the opportunity to work on something and to share something that means so much to me. And I'm even getting to work on a LinkedIn Learning for auditing design systems for accessibility. So, and that comes out, I think, in July. I'll tell you all more when I know more. But just know that to share this work and this journey with all of you means so much to me. So thank you. And with that, let's open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. Great job. Let's get into some of your questions, and thank you for to everybody for your awesome comments in the chat and your questions. So let's get into it. First off, Anna, I just wanted to share this comment that came into the question box that says, I like the way Anna explains points and she doesn't speak really fast. She's really incorporating good inclusivity. So kudos.
Thank you.
Okay. Question here. To your knowledge, is Microsoft using any research on flow, a positive psychology construct to support motivation and enjoyment while using Microsoft products?
That's a really interesting question. Flow is a fascinating subject, and I actually do not know the answer to this question, unfortunately, but I do love the question because flow is kind of like, for me, I'll answer what it is at the very least, and I suspect it is something we're looking at. But for me, focus flow is like, or flow rather, is like when I work on something and it's like my mind is just kind of, it's like relaxed, but I'm also active and able to focus. It's like when my partner and I are doing our little miniature paintings, I feel like I get into a flow. And so flow can be a really powerful tool in user experience design to really help users kind of feel like they're active, but not like tired from it, I guess. There's some really good research papers on it. Unfortunately, I'll have to come back to you with a more comprehensive answer.
Fair enough. All right, where would you suggest sourcing candidates for co-creation or research while testing a product?
I think one thing to keep in mind, so co-creation includes, I think, a few different things, right? Sourcing candidates can look a lot of different ways. So one, I always like to emphasize that having a cognitively diverse team is one thing that you can do to get started, and creating the tools and resources internally to employ people who have disabilities and who are neurodivergent and the like is a really powerful tool. And I highly recommend it anyway. That said, I think there's some really good research that some of the folks on our team have been doing around co-creation processes. And I think we're still developing our understanding, but in some contexts, what we've done is reach out to individuals who have identified that cognitive demand using certain applications for research that can help us connect with people, which I admittedly don't know the name of because I'm not a researcher, but we identified those individuals and we kind of created solutions and worked with them to identify if those solutions were working in one of our processes. So I realize that's not a very clear answer. I think it kind of comes in with a very similar research question around researching with people who have disabilities. And I think some of the processes we use to research and learn and work with people who have disabilities can inform the research we're doing to co-create, or the work we do to co-create. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Thank you, Anna. When you design for accessibility, you end up creating a better experience for all. Do you think is there a similar method for cognitive design? And should we be designing for those users who need less distractions, for example?
I do think this is something I actually am really excited. I mean, I'm always excited to answer questions, but I think this is kind of a similar thing, right? Where we know that when we create experiences that have at least baseline accessibility, that creates a better experience for everyone. And then when we create experiences that adapt to needs, it creates a better experience for everyone. I think the same thing happens and can happen with cognitive inclusive design. Like, for example, I have dyslexia, and my understanding is that for me, at least, it affects how I process information in general. And so I like subtitles personally, which is fun because, you might not expect that with dyslexia, but it helps me match what I'm hearing to what is being said, if that makes sense. And the same experience, right, is inclusive for someone who is hard of hearing or deaf. And so I think the same type of things will come up. And let's not forget that there's a huge intersection between folks we have identified through previous guidelines and folks who are neurodiverse and have cognitive needs that need to be met. There's a huge intersection there as well.
Absolutely. Anna, do you have advice for sharing cognitive design principles with teams of non-designers and developers, for example, project managers or administrators? This person notes that it's hard to balance giving enough info to convince others outside of your field of the importance without overwhelming them.
I think the biggest thing we can do to share information around this is to bring in folks with these perspectives. And so like to kind of inundate somebody with a lot of technical details and things like that right away can really, people can get kind of intimidated. And so I think one of the reasons I've been using Microsoft Inclusive Design for years is because of all the videos that we have, I should say. And so I generally recommend, and the way we kind of do it internally is we kind of sit down and have a workshop. And instead of having like a presentation, we have more conversation. We play the videos and then we talk about how, just like I did with you all today, we talk about how those needs can apply in our own lives and how we can extend the benefits of that design to other folks. And so I think that would be how I would approach it and how I've approached it at other organizations as well.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question here. So how would you go about prioritizing which types of cognitive abilities to research?
I think I would focus on it from, like, if we're focusing on it from a motivations perspective and a cognitive demands perspective, I would look at it from like what product I'm working on, doing research with folks, and seeing what they're identifying as the demand that's coming up most for them, right? So like for somebody who, like, one experience maybe has more focused demands. And so if you are hearing that from people, that can be your prioritization. And I think one of the most powerful things about this toolkit is the reminder of how important research is, how important it is to hear from folks who have needs around cognitive demands. And so prioritize research, prioritize what you're hearing, and go from there.
Excellent. Before we wrap, Anna, where could people find you to stay in touch with you and some more of your work?
Yeah, I am active on social medias, LinkedIn, Mastodon, and reluctantly Twitter. And honestly, the best place to reach me nowadays is LinkedIn, probably.
Wonderful. Well, we are at time here. Anna, thank you so much for your presentation. I know everybody here learned a ton. Thank you for sharing some of your work with us today.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.